Welcome to the Deep Dive Spirituality Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Brian Russell, and today it's my privilege to have as a guest Tricia Nelson. Tricia is the author of Heal Your Hunger, 7 Simple Steps to End Emotional Eating Now, and she's an internationally recognized expert on helping people with addictive personalities to overcome addictions, in particular, emotional eating. She herself has a compelling story of how she overcame both binge drinking and lost over 50 pounds and has now maintained that for her new weight for over 30 years by getting at the core, the root causes of her addictions. And in this episode, you're going to get some compelling takeaways and tools and also some real insights into what is beneath the various things that people in our world become addicted to, again, whether it's food or video games or alcohol or drugs or sexual addictions. At the root of all of these are deep pains. And Tricia talks about our hurts, the things that scare us, and our anxieties. And you're going to learn how she used really spiritual practices and insights about her inner game to break free and to offer freedom to others. So whether you know persons who struggle with various addictions, or maybe you yourself are struggling with something, this is going to be a powerful episode for you. Welcome, Tricia, to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Looking back, can you talk a little bit with those who are listening to your own spiritual journey, and what were some kind of key moments that led you to devoting your life to working with people with addictive personality and to especially specialize in this emotional eating?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, the food was a central part of my spiritual awakening. Bottom line is I was an emotional eater probably from the get-go in my life. And I hated my weight. I like to eat, but I didn't like the effects of my eating. So by age 20, I was 50 pounds overweight. And so it really plagued me. It made me feel bad about myself. I felt less than. I was very obsessed with food. I overate. I also overdrank when I drank. Mm-hmm. So I definitely hadn't had an addictive personality. And so things were kind of messy for me. And I will say that I grew up with a sense of God. I grew up in a religion that we went to church, and I sang in the choir. So I had that kind of formal upbringing for religion. I didn't really care for it because I didn't like rules, and so you couldn't clap in church. I grew up in the Northeast, and it was very stodgy, and you couldn't clap in church. And that's just somehow I didn't like that. I just that in my deepest being didn't make sense to me. Like, if you're joyful, you should be able to make a joyful noise, right? So that didn't make sense to me. But anyway, so I wasn't big on religion, but I was grateful that I grew up with some kind of foundation belief in God, and it helped me. I never really didn't like the idea of God or believing in God, but I also didn't feel very close to God. God felt like a man in the sky who was kind of distant, kind of like my dad, kind of distant, mm-hmm. Well-meaning, well-intentioned, but no real personal connection. It's kind of a aloof kind of relationship. So, I love my dad, but he's passed, but I appreciate him, but he was a man who didn't really, this is in the 60s. I was born in the 60s. And so it was sort of like he was the breadwinner, gone a lot, working hard and that kind of thing. So there wasn't a lot of interpersonal connection. And that's how I felt about God too. There's not a lot of interpersonal connection going on. However, because I really ran aground with my relationship with food, whereas, as I said, 50 pounds overweight and really hopeless, I didn't know what to do. I tried diets and exercise plans, of course, that's what you do first. And then, books and tapes, and I went to a 12-step program, and I went to therapy. I went to an eating disorders therapist. So I was doing lots of things. Mm-hmm. And nothing really changed. Like I was a yo-yoer. So my weight would fluctuate like 30 to 50 pounds. Like I'd be up 30, down 10, up 20, down 30. I had like 5 different sizes of pants in my closet because I didn't know what size I was going to be at any given time. So it was really, not a fun experience for me, especially when nothing worked for me in terms of solutions. So what happened is that I met somebody who had been morbidly obese, who was kind of a spiritual mentor. And this person, I was so grateful that I met this person. And interestingly enough, when I look back, I realized that so at some point I learned about getting on your knees to pray, like on the side of your bed. And so I tried that, and I had a futon at the time. I was like 21 years old. I had a futon at the time. And so like I'd hit my knees for like 10 seconds. This is not a deep conversation I was having by my bed. So like for 10 seconds, then I'd roll into bed. And then I get out of, in the morning I get out, but I'd hit my knees. I like literally hit my knees before I got up. But I'm telling you, 2 weeks after starting that practice of hitting my knees, I met this man who was the one who ended up helping me. And when I looked back, I thought, I bet that's not a coincidence, And so anyway, this man was able to help me because he really showed me that my problem wasn't food, or alcohol, because I certainly overdrank too, that it was really a deeper issue. And so he was able to show me really, or it's really able to make it safe enough for me to look at what those issues were, which I didn't feel safe enough in therapy, not to knock therapy, but 1 hour, time's up, take your issues and go, it just didn't give me the safety I really was craving. So this man really helped me and not only helped me access some kind of the pain. I'd had sexual abuse in my past as a child. That certainly, put a twist on things, and certainly fueled my overeating and padding my body with weight. And so I had that experience, and but it's not, my experience with addictions is never one thing. It's like you have trauma and then you spawn all these dysfunctional ways of coping, that you bring into your life that creates stress that you then stress eat over, or stress drink, or stress smoke over. So anyway, but he helped me kind of unravel all this and take a look at the pieces. And he also taught me self-care practices like meditation. I started a meditation practice twice a day for 20 minutes at that time. And I've had that for 32 years now. I'm super grateful. Yeah, amazing. I'm so grateful for that. And, praying on my knees, that's been a constant for 32 years, and reading spiritual literature, reading out of the Bible, other, kinds of literature, metaphysics, a lot of just different things that really spoke to my heart and helped me develop this relationship with God that's different than what I learned in church, So it's definitely been an evolution, but that's kind of what happened for me. I didn't have a white light blow to the head experience. Although I did at some point, actually about 15 years in, I did go to a totally different kind of church where they have you, give your life to Jesus. And I did that too, and that was never really, the Jesus thing was never really prominent in my religion. But when I got hurting bad enough 15 years later, it was sort of like I needed that at that time. And I did that, and boy, oh boy, did that change me. That really helped me, and it was amazing. And again, only when I look back, I knew that something changed, because my life, and we can talk about that if you want to, but my life, I was in a really tough place at that time, and I didn't have the resources to deal with it. I could tell I was dry. Like I was out of juice, and I'm like, and I wasn't eating, and I wasn't doing anything else to medicate. So I had a lot of pain, and I was out of juice, and it's like I had no power. I didn't know what I was going to do. And by a set of circumstances, I ended up at this Baptist church, and they had me, do the come to Jesus thing. And I did it, and it worked. Like, I was like, oh, this is what all that fuss is about, And so I had an amazing experience then too. So it's all an evolution, and, yes. But it's been driven by my addictive habits, and the fact that it helped me get loose from those habits. And then my desire to not go back to them has just continued to force me into new ways of solving problems.
And just talking about addiction, I mean, we were going to get to the spirituality of all this too. And again, I just appreciate that answer that you gave. That was really vulnerable and also powerful. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, thanks.
But when you talk about an addictive personality, what are the signs of that? So if somebody's listening and they're, like, what would be signs that maybe you need to do a little deeper work on yourself? Like, how would you
Yeah.
know?
Well, I mean, an addiction of any kind, and it can be process addictions or physical, alcohol, drugs, smoking, whatever, but then masturbation, porn, of course, sex addiction, shopping, running up credit card debt. I mean, there's so many things we can do to medicate, and they all hit the pleasure centers in our brain, and then we create a tolerance for it and we have to have more. So
Yeah.
there's so many different ways to, be addicted. And I've done a lot of them, I've tried a lot of them, if it's worth doing, it's worth overdoing, and why stop at one, so I've done a lot of them, but, it's really about running from oneself. And so that's always been what it's about for me, is like, there was a little story once of, there's these two brothers. One brother goes over to the other brother's house, and the other brother, doesn't drink, but the brother who's visiting says, can I get a beer? And she's like, sure. And he gets him a beer. He has beer in his house. He gives him a beer, and he's like, why do you want a beer? Just out of curiosity. He said, so I can feel better.
Mhm.
And the brother says, what's wrong with the way you feel? And it's such a simple thing, but it's true. Like, what's going on that I can't be present for? And that's, to me, really what it's about. But for somebody, to answer your question, if somebody's wondering, am I addicted to something? It takes over your mind. Like, you think about it way too much. Like, it just becomes an obsession. Doing it becomes an obsession, or hiding it becomes an obsession, or getting rid of the effects of it. Like with food, how do I lose weight? How do I control these rolls on my tummy so they're not noticeable? How do I change the bloat in my face? It's like, it's all consuming. So it's an all consuming obsession, and it changes your behavior. So you're not yourself. When you're under the influence of this thing, you might act obnoxious, or not present, at least, because you're checked out. It affects your, it has consequences, like affects your relationship. If your spouse is starting to say, hey, you're overdoing it, or, hey, I don't like you when you do that. It's just, you're not fun to be around. Like, so other people are noticing. That's a telltale sign. It's affecting your work, abilities or efficacy. So either you're not showing up for work, or you're just, even if you're physically there, you're not really there, or you're making mistakes, or somebody's pointing it out and giving you warnings. These are all consequences to having an addiction. And also, like I mentioned, the tolerance, where a little bit was good, but then it's not giving you the same hit. So you have to do more of it and do more of it, in order to get that same pleasure light up in your brain. So, and also, if you stop it, you have withdrawal symptoms, like you're physically withdrawing from it, like sugar or alcohol, or you're so emotionally dependent, when you don't have it, you're just, you're not a nice person to be around. You're miserable, you're bitchy and crabby, and, like nobody wants to be around you. You're snapping, you're, biting people's heads off because you don't have your anesthetic. You don't have the, that blanket for your uncomfortable feelings, and it's all just flying up out of you. So.
And when you specialize in emotional eating, and I should just mention, you have your book, Heal Your Hunger: 7 Simple Steps to End Emotional Eating Now. And one of the issues that I know you deal with is differentiating between emotional hunger and then the fact that we all are all hungry. And so if we just take 3 common addictions, and you've mentioned these already. So if we take food, sexual addiction, and then let's throw in something with money, whether it's overspending, or maybe you're addicted to saving. I mean, so at some level, we have physical needs. We need to eat. We have sexual needs, and obviously the money. What you need, some money to survive. So how do you differentiate between the emotional piece and the actual hunger itself, which may just simply be part of being human. Is that a fair question? And
Totally. Yeah, totally. Because I mean, it's never just physical. Like, I think we're meant to enjoy things, like I enjoy food, and I think we're all emotional eaters to some degree, where it just feels good to eat, but not just because we're nourishing our bodies, but because like yummy foods are yummy and they make us feel good, and then a child, breastfeeding, his mother's milk. I mean, that's meant to be a bonding experience. So there's definitely emotional, things happening, for sure, when we're feeding ourselves. But I think the thing, certainly, that what you're talking about, in terms of the emotional hunger, I do think it's rarely if we've had enough to eat, then it's rarely about the food.
Mhm.
If we're eating more than our body needs for the day. So if we're overeating or going too far, or if we're binging, we're eating in kind of a violent, self-abusive way where we feel stuffed and sick and, just want to pass out on the couch, and then we're hating ourselves for what we did, going overboard. It's not about the food. It's really not about the food. There's more to it than that. It's certainly a habit. If we do that a lot, we're just used to it. We're used to more food. We're used to having foods that light us up, constantly. But it's definitely an emotional hunger. And so much of the time it's for connection, connection, spiritual connection for sure, but a connection with other people, with our fellows. And so many of us are isolated, and the pandemic just really made that worse. We need touch. We need to be touched. We need to be hugged. We need attention. We need to give attention. We need to listen to people, see people, be seen. So much of that is missing in our lives, and food just seems, it's just such an obvious way to try to fill that void, but obviously other addictions as well. So, but just really important for people who are, especially food, they have food issues. So easy to say, food and weight issues. It's so easy to say, oh, I got to get the right diet. Like, is it a keto diet? Is it intermittent fasting? Is it vegan? What is it that's going to do it for me? And it's like, none of it, because it's not about the food. Like, I'm sure you got to eat healthy, but if you don't satisfy that emotional hunger and get connection, and deal with your stress and all the stuff that's going on between your head, you're going to stay hungry no matter how much you eat. And that's what drives the addiction.
So beyond the things that you just said, stress, need for connection, are there other hidden causes that sit underneath addictions that you haven't mentioned already?
Yeah, I'll tell you about the PEP formula, because I think this is a great place for people to start. The PEP is I've researched this for 3 decades, and PEP is kind of a way to start understanding your habits and where they're coming from. It's sort of a simplified version, but we kind of have a sense of what things do to us when we overdo alcohol or drugs or food, but we don't think a whole lot about what it's doing for us. Mm-hmm. And so these addictive habits are serving us. And so in my case, the food was, P as an acronym. So the first P is, it was a painkiller. So it killed pain, emotional pain. Like, it just put a blanket. And that's why I rarely craved lettuce. I craved, popcorn and ice cream and chips and cookies, because that's heavy, dense food. And it really killed the pain. Yeah. It deadened everything. Just put a blanket over all emotions, feeling no pain in the moment. Right. And so it does it well, but any addiction will do that. We do it so that we don't feel, we don't feel painful emotions. The E in PEP stands for escape. And so, emotional eaters have a lot of fear. Like, we have our minds race, and we have we do a lot of awfulizing and thinking about worst case scenarios, all anxious thinking. And food is just this amazing escape where we're just like, again, we're sort of just taking a time out. And it's an unhealthy timeout. There are healthier ones, but we are, we're using food to just check out. And that's why the pandemic created so many emotional eaters out of us, out of our culture, because I mean, I had friends who were always like patting me on the head, saying, that's nice. You're an emotional eating expert. Good for you. But the minute the pandemic had hit, they're like calling me like, Tricia, I can't stop eating. Like I think I'm an emotional eater, because we're stuck at home with all this food and this huge panic and real stress where all of a sudden our lives are turned upside down and you could walk out the door and get sick and die. I mean, that is some serious, stress on the body and the psyche. So people were turning to food. It was there, it was accessible, and it worked. So it's a great way to escape. And the last P in PEP stands for punishment. And this is a little bit, counterintuitive because we think of food, our favorite foods or goodies or wine or whatever as a reward. Like, at the end of a hard work week, I'm going to reward myself in this way. But the truth is that if we overdo it on a regular basis, we're really beating up our bodies. We're stressing our bodies, we're abusing our bodies with these substances that have negative side effects and make us feel really bad. So it's like, why would I do that? And I really think it's because I know for emotional eaters, overeaters are overfeelers.
Mm-hmm.
And we feel guilty really easily.
Mm-hmm.
And so we tend to, punish ourselves with food, and it's a subconscious thing. Nobody's saying, I'm going to go beat myself up. And they're like, no, I'm going to get my favorite chocolate. But the truth is that underneath, when we overdo it and we constantly struggle and fight our weight and, do drastic things about, to fix our bodies, that's really a form of self-abuse. So we have to dig deeper on that too. So painkiller, to recap, the PEP stands for painkiller, escape, and punishment. So these are three primary ways that these addictions serve us, or how we use them. But we have to dig into, what's the pain, what's the fear, what's the guilt, and those drivers have to be looked at.
That's really fascinating. I'd never heard that acronym before. I'm familiar with addiction cycles, and like that punishment piece seems like, and you named it, you said guilt and shame. So it's like the irony of addiction is you end up feeling terrible, even though you momentarily feel good. And so I never thought about it as the person self-punishing. So instead of it being the effect, are you suggesting that at some level a person wants to feel bad? And so ironically, the very thing that's driving them, and it's not so much an effect of the addiction, it's actually part of it, is you want to have a reason to feel bad. Is that what you're actually saying? Wow.
Absolutely. It's a subconscious kind of form of self-hatred.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's really powerful. I had never heard that before, and I think a lot of people.
I made it up. Yeah. That's why. I mean, I didn't make it up.
No.
I researched it, but I never read it anywhere. That's just from the work I've done, that I just see it over and over again.
No, I think that's actually really interesting because I talked in my own coaching. I run into some folks that struggle with different types of addictions, and we talk about the addiction cycle. And everybody can say, yeah, I feel really terrible when I'm done. But your insight's really powerful, because that actually invites not just to recognize you feel bad, but to actually recognize that something inside of you wants to feel bad, and I guess you're seeing that as a real freedom you have to do the work to get to there, but that seems like that'd be profoundly freeing.
Yeah. Because that it is, that is the upside of it, is that it's not happening to us.
Yeah.
Like we're creating it.
Yes.
And we do, as addicts, we're super sensitive. And so when we do things that are out of alignment with who we are or who we're meant to be, we feel bad. And so we have a lot of buried guilt. I wasn't always a nice person, I come off real shiny and nice, but I could be a real bitch, and I'd feel it. I'd feel bad about it. I'd try to dance and kind of, weasel my way out of the consequences of it, but it wasn't lost on me, so I'd pack that stuff down.
Yeah.
And there's a day of reckoning, and so I had to address that stuff, and I'm so glad, because then I don't have to stuff it down with food anymore. Just, call spade a spade. Like I've been that way, and I don't want to be that way anymore, and by God's loving grace, I don't have to be. But if I'm just sort of running from those truths about myself, I'm going to have to keep running. And that's what drives the addiction.
So talk a little bit about, in the healing of whether it's a food addiction. We'll just use your specialty. So
Sure.
what role do you see between, spiritual practices? You mentioned how much meditation's helped you, and then the healing of addiction. So how do those two things relate to each other?
Oh my gosh, vital. I teach all my clients to meditate, and it's it's like, that's a requirement in my programs. And it's so much easier to do when you're in a program where other people are doing it, because everybody knows they should meditate. Like, it's like, we're in the modern century here now. So everybody knows, it's not just like a 60s thing or India thing. It's like, everybody knows they should meditate, and that there's health benefits, but who really does it? Like, who takes the time? It just is so impractical, when we have a list of things to do and we've got texts coming in and appointments to keep. So my experience is, my clients who want to lose weight and overcome emotional eating, like, they're all, I call it the 6 self-care success secrets. So there's a lot of different self-care secrets, one of which is meditation, another is prayer, and another is spiritual reading, and so on. So walking, talking, writing. So those are the 6 self-care success secrets. But meditation is a cornerstone. And, I was, as I said, taught to meditate very early on in my journey, and I'm totally dependent on it. Like, I can't live without it. I mean, it has changed my life. It's just brought down my stress level, but on a daily basis, like, and it's like, you either meditate or you medicate. I mean, that's the truth. It's one or the other. Like, people, in the afternoon, when you have that dip, people are either reaching for a cup of coffee or for chocolate, or for a pipe, or meditation. And so I have that dip in the afternoon, and that's when I do my second meditation. And it does what chocolate or coffee would have done, but without the negative side effects. So it's a pick me up. I feel better. I feel rested. I'm like ready to go for another 6 or 8 hours. And so it's fantastic. But if I don't do it, my energy's down, my willpower is down, and I'm just susceptible to just, unconsciously eating for energy. So it's really an intentional way to live. And you got to get conscious. If you're going to overcome emotional eating, you have to wake up. You have to wake up to your emotions. You have to wake up to the connection between your emotions and what you're reaching for. And you have to, wake up spiritually. You have to be really aware of your body. And they all go together. But bringing down stress, I'd say, is the number one reason for meditation, and if you're stressed out, you're going to stress eat. So you got to find a way to bring down that stress.
I loved your answer. I loved your 6 practices. Everybody that listens on this is really gonna enjoy that too. It's like,
cool.
My own story, which we don't have to get into here, but it's like, I basically, my basic comeback was the centering prayer and intentional journaling. And it's just fun that you had both meditation and writing on there. And I mean, I did those other things too, but I mean, that's so important. And that's a resource that everybody has that they can,
Yes.
So that,
so anywhere you can meditate anywhere. That's the cool thing. On a plane, on a train, on a boat, in the car, anywhere.
No, it's so good. So somebody listening, and we have some pastors that are listening on here, and Christians aren't immune from addictions. And in fact, it's sometimes it's harder because you're embarrassed. You think you shouldn't be there, especially pastors. And we have some pastors that listen to this. So what would be an immediate action step that you would advise a person that's listening today that's saying, wow, I can see how I medicate with food or something else? What should those persons begin to do even today after they finish listening to our interview?
Yeah, well, I mean, I have some resources I'm happy to offer. And I appreciate your mentioning my book. That's on Amazon for $10. It's also on Audible. It's like a 5.5 hour listen on Audible. I recorded it last summer. I do have a quiz on my website too, I think, which is helpful to people, because my experience is it's really emotional eating and food addiction is a spectrum. On the low end is emotional eating. We all do it from time to time. On the high end is food addiction, like where I was at, where I'd binge and feel terrible, gain weight and be down, falling down a rabbit hole. So if somebody takes that free quiz, they'll learn where they are on the spectrum. It's a personalized score that somebody gets, and then they have that opportunity to know kind of what I'll give next steps for them. But I will say, and that's at healyourhunger.com, my website. But I will say that Just noticing, just sort of being more aware. And I think I'm so grateful you had me on the show, because I think anybody who listens to this, you can't unknow this information. Like it's,
Right.
once your consciousness changes, you're more aware, of course, of your habits. And so I think it's just really important to know that there's a connection. Like it's not about the food. It's not about any other addiction. It's really about what pain we're in, like why we don't feel good, like why, what's wrong with how you feel. Well, something's wrong with how I feel, and what can I do about that? And as I said, support is so important. So not trying to do it alone. There's so much shame around addiction. There's so much, people just want to fix it on their own because they don't want to admit they have it, because they think they're the only one, or they think they're terrible for having it. And it's just, this human experience is, one where we all got something. My mentor used to say, all God's children got problems, so we just do. And so just knowing that you're not alone if you're struggling with something, it doesn't make you a bad person at all. But the hiding it and trying to pretend you don't have it just perpetuates it. Like it'll be impossible to stop if you're keeping it to yourself and trying to just, take care of it on your own so that you don't ever have to admit it. Honestly, the admitting of it is part of the humbling that allows God to heal you. It just opens your heart to healing when you reach out to your brother or sister for help, and so there's a lot of healing that just comes from giving up the gig, stopping the merry-go-round and the pretending. So I definitely would recommend, for anybody listening, to reach out for help. And just realize that all God's children have problems, and welcome to the human race. But the good news is there's a way out, and it's not by self-control or willpower, because that doesn't work. It really has to be God's power, but not just you and God on your own. In my experience with addiction, we got to put people in the mix, and people who have had the same problem. And that's why Alcoholics Anonymous has been so effective, more effective than anything in overcoming alcoholism, because it's that group, that peer, dynamic that's so powerful. And all my programs are groups as well, because, it just brings people out of isolation. And it's like, oh my God, somebody across the world, I do my stuff on Zoom, my groups on Zoom. And it's like, wow, somebody in Australia or some country I can't even pronounce has done the same crazy things I've done, and it just breaks down that wall of shame and self-judgment. And it just kind of lets us just realize, oh, we're all dealing with something, and this way we can help each other. So I think that's what God means for us to do. I think we're meant to do things in community and in support of each other, and I think that's where God is, wherever two or more are gathered, there I am. So
amen to that. And I noticed one of the last chapters in your book has the title Courage. And, and I love that word as a virtue. I think it's so important. If you don't have courage, you can't really have anything else. So again, I didn't get a chance to read that chapter, but what role does courage play in recovery in the way that you use that word?
Yeah, what I mean by that is really that every step you take to heal takes courage. Stepping out of isolation and admitting you have a problem, probably the hardest thing you'll ever do. Bar none. It's just the build up to that is so hard, and there's so much pain. Like we don't do it just because everything's great, So it's a hard thing to do, but I'd say every step of the way. Meditation takes courage.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you have to sit there with your crazy brain.
Yes.
I mean, that takes a lot of courage. I mean, my mind's never, people always think that you have to be, your mind is supposed to be quiet. Like that's why everybody like gives up on meditation so quickly, or like, oh, I'm doing it wrong, I'm having thoughts. Like, of course, and I know I'm sure you teach on this. It's like, of course you're gonna have thoughts. Like that's what our brains do, they think. So just letting the thoughts be there, and just settling in and letting just things wash, just letting the thoughts come and go takes courage, and not judging yourself and not giving up. Sitting down and shutting up is not easy for an addict. We rarely do it. So it takes a lot of courage. For sure. And getting up each day and trying something new. I literally just got done telling my clients, at first the new life of self-care and abstinence from whatever, it seems so strange and different, so foreign. And the old life seems familiar, but if you persevere, the new life will become the familiar and the old life will be the foreign, but you have to push through to get there, and also another thing I teach is that we don't think our way into right action. We act our way into right thinking.
Good.
And so the actions are the self-care secrets, and the community and reaching out for help and the humbling effect of needing each other. So that's what heals us.
No, that was so powerful. And just, I know we want to be fair to for your time. So grateful for the time that you've shared. So just a couple real quick questions. Outside of, reading the Bible, like what have been 2 or 3 books that have really shaped you deeply in your own thinking, whether you want to talk about spiritually or even you're thinking about addiction? What have been 2 or 3 books you found really helpful?
Oh my gosh, so many, but there's one called Around the Year with Emmett Fox, and Emmett Fox was a minister, early on in the 1900s. And actually some of the boys from Alcoholics Anonymous in New York used to go listen to his sermons, and that kind of helped the early shaping of Alcoholics Anonymous. But that little book, it's just bite-sized pieces each day from his sermons. But that really helped me believe in a loving God. It helped me get from the man in the sky to, God being within, the spirit of God within. And I'm so grateful for that. And just, I used to think I was so bad. There are 3 things I used to think about myself. I used to think I was stupid, I was bad, and I was ugly. And
Wow.
These are fundamental. I know, it's like, what up? So, but I used to, that's where I came from the trauma and from the way I grew up, low self-esteem, being a fat girl, and so it's hard to outlive those beliefs about ourselves. But by the grace of God, today, here I am. I don't believe any of that anymore. So it's taken time. It's taken right action. Like I had to act my way into not believing those things anymore. But another thing that I was told early on was that I'm God's favorite baby daughter. And I just love that. And I tell everybody that because everybody can say that too about themselves, daughter or son. And I don't think there's a better thing that we can learn in life than that God loves us unconditionally.
Amen. Yeah.
And so I just feel so grateful. And that book in particular kind of helped me get that, like, oh yeah, that's all God does all day long is love. Can't do anything else, just love, so that was powerful. The Bible, I mean, I can't, like there's certain things from the New Testament and from, Matthew that I love to read every day. And the verses on love that I love from Corinthians, and so that's been powerful for me. There's just so many books just about who we are, and as amazing beings and unlimited, things that we can do in an unlimited way. I'm blanking on a third, but
it's okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, those are great resources. And, it just reminded me of the whole thing about God's love. One of my favorite prayers, one of my mentors taught me to pray. And I forget the original source, but I heard this from a guy named Maxie Dunham. He always said, pray, Lord, help me believe the truth about myself, no matter how wonderful it is or how beautiful it is. And that's one of those really powerful statements that it gets a review. So just last question. I mean, you mentioned your website, healyourhunger.com. Can you say, is that the best place for folks to find you, and any other places you'd like to share?
Yes, I have a podcast called the Heal Your Hunger Show, which people like, and I love doing, and I'm excited to have you on as a guest as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then I have a group on Facebook called The Secret Sauce to End Emotional Eating. So if somebody's wanting help around that, that's a great place to go. And then Instagram, I'm Tricia Nelson _ for daily posts.
Okay. Yeah, this is wonderful. I want to thank you for sharing your specialty with us today. Thank you for
you.
I mean, your real ministry. You're really helping people all over the world, it sounds like, through Zoom. So thank you for honoring your calling and not only opening yourself up to healing, but then essentially become a healed helper, which I think is the ultimate witness that we can make. So great.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I'm very blessed. I feel very blessed to be able to do this for sure.
Well, thank you again so much for being on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And friends, thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Deep Dive Spirituality Conversations podcast. Thanks for listening all the way to the end. Until next time, live by faith, be known by love, and be a voice of hope in the world. Amen. Thank you so much for listening to the Deep Dive Spirituality Conversations podcast. I'm so grateful to have you as a listener. And if you found this episode particularly helpful, would you take a couple minutes and share it with friends through your social media networks? And if you could also please leave a review, especially on iTunes, as that will help other people to find this podcast. I have links to all of the resources mentioned in this episode in the show notes. And I also want to highlight www.centeringprayerbook.com. That is a link to give you some resources and allow you to sign up for updates for the release of my book. Will be out in September 2021, Centering Prayer, How Sitting Quietly in God's Presence Can Change Your Life. Again, until next time, live by faith, be known by love, and be voices of hope to others.